Well, welcome back to another session. I hope you're well. We continue in the session by picking up from where we stopped prior. Uh, I started this series as a challenge to succeed, directed towards men. In the last session, I covered point number 8 with regards to how you can identify whether you have the B traits in yourself as a man. In today's session, I'm going to cover 4 ways, observations, traits, you might say personality, characters or characteristics that are inherent in most men who perhaps have what I call the beta um, software installation. Now, the first I started, and perhaps it might be useful, if you forgive me, for me to, if you bear with me, I will, I think for those perhaps who may not have been part of the prior sessions, let me go through the 8 items I've covered so far. Number 1, if a man who pursues a woman for more than a month, intensively with no reciprocated investment in time, resources, affection, intimacy, or sex. Number 2, a man who moves or is willing to relocate, leave his peers, family, nation, country, and particularly his garden. His garden referring to place of work, his purpose, his mission, his calling, his magnificent obsession, or his career or work. Number 3, a man who pedestalizes a woman, puts her as the cherry on the cake, and constantly wears the feminine frame, shows no emotional stoicism, cries at a disproportionate rate compared to her, and is more interested in supporting her vision than actually in supporting and taking the responsibility for his vision. Number 4, a man who goes 50-50 and who believes in partnership rather than leadership and responsibility and obligation and duty. Number 5, a man who agrees to double barrel names as mandated by the woman or whatever derivatives of that. Now, a man who chooses a woman's last name instead, or allows the conversation about a name swap, or a man who is actually informed that as part of the acceptance of a marriage proposal, that she has no intentions of using or keeping or having any part of his last name be part of her last name. Number 6, stay-at-home fathers, or rather stay-at-home husbands, or stay-at-home boyfriends, where effectively he is a kept man. The provision, protection, or rather provision, is completely on the woman's responsibility and shoulders, and he facilitates or does nothing as a contributing factor to that. Number 7, a man raised by and a man who subscribes to gynocentrism. Number 8, man raised by a feminist mother and a feminine father. Now, those were the 8 items I covered in the sessions yesterday and the one prior. Now, let me begin today's session by covering 4 extra items. I'll make it quick. Number 1, this will be not number 1, but number 9. Apologies for that. A man who was raised by an absent father. Now, if you were raised by an absent father, and if you were raised by an absent father, or you were raised in a family with an absent father, and therefore with a mother who did everything, who did it all. Now, let me start by saying single mothers do an incredible, exceptional job. Exceptional. Obviously, they do 2 jobs, or they try and attempt to do 2 jobs. A responsibility for 2 parties, which individually would be a lot. They try to combine, or they attempt to combine, both responsibilities as part of their obligation. So they do an exceptional job. Unfortunately, even 2 parents, to do a great job with 2 parents, 2 loving, competent parents, is a hard job. For one person to do both jobs, raise the kids, go to work, and keep out all the invaders, all the predators at bay, is difficult. Men who were raised with no father involvement grow up with a sense that they were never wanted. If they were raised by a mother who was determined to make their life successful, what they then see is a combination of two things. Number one, an absent father, which they identify as I wasn't wanted. A present mother, who they identify as did everything for me and loved me. As a result of this, a man, such a boy or man, develops this, what I call, awe towards the feminine frame, primarily because he has seen a woman who has gone against all odds, and he has not seen a man who was willing to do whatever it would have taken to be responsible, to bear his cross on his shoulders and stay. Such boys have a loss of identity. In the absence of a father, a sense of self-worth, self-concept, self-assurance, self-discipline, self-mastery is lost. A substitute therefore has to be applied. They usually lean towards mother and therefore develop an aura towards women as the more stable, loving, kind, nurturing, and dependable of the two sexes. Now, boys, as such, unfortunately, have the feminine software installed in them. They become what we call son husbands. The mother raises the son in a manner that as he grows, she wants him to be a good citizen, a gentleman, to be everything that his father should have been, but most importantly, to be her support system, her rock. So what you then see is such men have no choice. At home, there is no masculine role model. They go to school. Most of the schools, primarily in relation to education, is run by women. And so there is no presence of a masculine role model that he can emulate. As a result of this, he's feminized at home, he's feminized at school, on a social-wide basis. The media, the traditional media, and social media constantly remind him the men are not dependable. The men are not worthy of the adoration that they think they need. So such boys grow up with feminine software. Now, I stated something yesterday and in the sessions that preceded. 4 stages. You're born a male, you transition into boyhood by guidance, nurturing, and actually modeling. You move from boyhood to manhood by work, study, practice, developing a wisdom and understanding, and good judgment. You move from manhood to gentleman, to being a gentleman, by being crafted. So you become a man by work. You become a boy by guidance. You become a gentleman by being crafted. It's like a craft. It's like a very subtle process. In the absence of a father, most boys skip the manhood phase. Why? From being a male, remember what I said, you model towards boyhood, but if the only person around that can be modeled is a feminine role model, then he starts to model the feminine avatar. So he becomes soft, hence the beta installation. There is no father, so he skips the manhood process. But then he's developed into a gentleman because most mothers teach their sons to be everything, unlike the unreliable fathers for whom they reproduced for. So the first of today's session, which would have been item number 9, is if you were raised by or raised with an absent father and with a mother that did everything, there's a high probability that you have the beta installation. Now, are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. Absolutely. Even a broken clock is right twice every day. There's an 8.3% chance that a broken clock will keep the time accurately. It does so twice in every 24 hours. 8.33%. Now, number 10. If you were raised as a boy minority in the house, I'll give you examples. A boy minority in the house with an absent father. A boy minority in the house with a passive father. A boy minority in the house with a feminine father. There's a high correlation between that and having the beta installation in you. Let me give you a good example. A family of 6. You're the only boy. 4 girls. No father. So in total, what you have is a feminine energy in the house. 5 women, 1 man. If you had no role models, no uncles, no big, you might say big guardians around in the community, everything in the house will scream the feminine energy. As a young boy, developing into boyhood, you're more likely to see around you the feminine spirit than the masculine spirit. So you would lean towards the feminine rather than the masculine. Example number 2. Only child. Only one mother, no father. There is still the influence of the main person you look up to. Third example. 1 boy, 2 girls, and a mother. But a passive father. So you have 2 men, technically speaking, but you also have, say, 3 women. But if you have a passive father and the mother calls the shots, she's the one who makes the major decisions, then unfortunately you would find, apologies for the noise, you would find that you would lean towards the feminine energy and the feminine disposition. Now number 3, or rather number 11 I should say, is the third item for today, but number 11 on the overall list. If you were not socialized as a boy, now this is a big one. Usually, up to about age 4 or 5, if you do not socialize kids very properly, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to be socialized going forward. This is partly why a young boy needs to be around other boys from a young age. Now, it's fine for him to be around other girls, but it's even more important for him to be around other boys at a young age. If all he does is spend time around the feminine energy or around women or girls, what you tend to find is that he takes on, in many ways it's like neuroplasticity. You take on the behaviors and the mannerisms and the temperament and the attitudes of the people around you. There was a saying, I don't know how correct it might be today, this was before social media, that you are an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. In many ways, it rings true in this instance. Young boy, 2 or 3 years old, say 3 and a half, spends a lot of time with young women or babies, female. He tends to take the disposition of the women. So if you were not socialized as a boy, and even as you go from being a preschool to being a teenager, if you were not socialized and you were not never around most men, you will find that there's a sense of a lack of awareness of your true essence as a man, self-identity crisis, self-confidence crisis, self-worth that is always questioning itself, because you've never really modeled and never really had the opportunity to play with a man. I make reference to the importance of fathers. The data is very clear. Unfortunately, fathers do not articulate what we provide and what we do, as well as mothers. For example, I'm going to give you just a few. The data should suggest, and the data is almost conclusive, in the absence of a father, a child has a 50% chance of having a higher probability of ADHD compared to a child who was raised with a father. In the absence of a father, boys and girls suffer by not having their father's telomeres, which effectively determines your life expectancy, is reduced by roughly 15 to 20% if there's no father. But for boys particularly, in the absence of a father, if he has a sister, his is likely going to be roughly about 50% less than his sister, which means his life expectancy is reduced. More importantly, fathers provide what we call boundary enforcement based based on the extension of boundary setting. Mothers and fathers set boundaries at the same rate. Fathers enforce boundaries much greater than mothers. That determines and creates empathy in a child. More importantly, dads engage in what I call roughhousing, rough and tumble play, and taking risks. Taking risks at a young age, having a father around, develops in a boy's psyche. It fires synapses in the brain that allows the boy go through the process of developing the ability to set goals, achieve the goals, calculate risks, stay disciplined, focus on a vision, and therefore delayed gratification, which is a single predictor of success for boys and girls. And the reason I've given all this explanation is this: it's simple. In the absence of the opportunity to play from a young age with no fathers, what boys tend to do is start to emulate the feminine spirit, the feminine disposition, in a manner which causes him not to be, you might say, the adventurer that he should be, someone who is out there using his logic. You tend to find most men, therefore, are developed on the basis of emotions. Men are logical in the way we think. Women are emotional. Both parties have a combination of both logical and emotional. One dominates. For men, logic. For women, emotions. When you meet a man or a boy who runs all of his logic through his emotions, it's indicative of a boy who was not taught at a very early age how to think, how to use his reasoning faculty, but did not get engaged or was not involved with play. Roughhousing, rough and tumble play, as a result of, or as part of the process of setting boundaries and enforcing the boundaries which fathers provide. So, if you were raised in a manner where perhaps from a young age, with no father involvement or very feminine father present, you did not participate in play with other boys, you tend to miss the social cues that comes with masculinity or boyhood, or being a boy. In addition to that, what you find is if you were not given the opportunity to join either group sports, team sports, individual sports, but less so, or things such as group activities, Boy Scout, and the likes, you tend to find that you're isolated in your emotions. And rather than see that some of the thoughts you have and concerns you have as a boy are not exclusive to you, by failure of not having access to that group, what you tend to do is internalize your concerns. This is why boys such as this tend to have more depression. Why? Because they do not talk, because they haven't learned how to play with other boys. Now, I make recommendations always. Sports is great. Starting early, even better. Preferably team sports, so you can learn how to play with other men and other boys. I would say this: my observation has been when you meet boys who are feminized too much, there is a sense of unease when they find themselves around other masculine men. Boys who are raised without fathers or who have the beta installation tend to find it easier to be around women because they don't find that energy to be threatening. Whereas if they're around masculine men, they find it very threatening. Why? Because there's a sense that let me use it for all intents and purposes, we're biologically similar, but from an attitudinal perspective, from a behavioral perspective, from a drive, we are very different. It would be the same as a lion at the point when it was still a cub, just recently been born, taken away from the pack, from the wild, and placed in a zoo and nurtured, or placed in a home and fed as though it was a cat. Eventually, when released into the wild, it has all the physical attributes of a lion, but stood next to a wild lion, there is a level of intimidation. It looks at the boys and says, I have everything you have: intellect, abilities, hands, size, strength, but My internal makeup is very different. Now, the final, number 12, though number 4 from today's session. Let me talk about martial arts and sports. I think I alluded to some of it already. I tried to combine 11 and 12. What is the purpose of martial arts for boys? And how does this affect the beta installation? The provider-protector role is an important role that men, over time, have been responsible for. Prior to the Second World Wars, most men got this sense of purpose from recognizing that our country, our nation needed us. So a man's purpose came from the fact that we needed to survive. The need for survival created a purpose. We then had responsibilities, and those responsibilities created roles for us in relationships or in families. And there were reasons to stay in those roles and to maintain those responsibilities. The reasons was the need to survive. In the West, we have solved all of the need for survival completely. And what this simply means is that the traditional roles of provider-protector, though necessary, the protector role is no longer as important. Women are now emancipated and they can earn. Women are doing much better than men in most areas when it comes to education and actually when it comes to work environment. As a result of that, the need for provision is no longer as important. The one thing we've lost is the purpose. There's a purpose void. Why? We don't have wars. Number 2, there are no fathers in the houses. So most boys get their purpose and identity from their fathers, which is why most boys emulate their fathers. In the absence of a purpose, because we don't have wars and the nation doesn't need us, and considering that actually that in most governments, most nations, the government has become the surrogate father. And in addition to not having fathers present, what you didn't have is a purpose void. Therefore, most boys are being raised not to have an idea about what their purpose is. Sport plays a role. Here's the key part. The way we keep score for boys was always using 3 S's. Success, sports, sex. Success was purely academics. Sports was the next, you might say, benchmark. And boys who got into sports, whether that be rugby, football, whether that be any type of athletics, developed an ability to be around other men, listen to ideas that you disagreed with, have a coach who served as a father, who guided you, sometimes get into fights, controlled. So you knew your limits and you knew other people's limits. Martial arts provided a great bridge. It provided the benefits of sports, but it also allowed the testosterone and that part of you that is biologically male to show itself. In the homes with no fathers, many of these boys were being taught to sit down when taking a piss. They were being taught that testosterone was a bad thing. A lot of these boys grew up hearing that masculinity is toxic, and the biological need we have as men, either to fight or for war, was something evil. Martial arts was a useful bridge because what it did was it provided an opportunity for you to, in a controlled environment, develop certain skills, critical thinking faculties, response, speed, accuracy, timing, but in a controlled way. So in several martial arts, you have what we call tenets or a creed. You had a code of conduct. The code of conduct wasn't for you to be aggressive. It was for you to have controlled aggression. Those who have their swords but keep them sheathed will inherit the earth. Simply meaning, you want to be a powerful warrior, but you want to be a controlled warrior. Because all that energy you need to develop and understand how to use it. Now, boys who therefore did not get into martial arts, whether that be boxing, jiu-jitsu, karate, taekwondo, judo, or any other form, missed the opportunity to pair bond from a disciplinary perspective with a coach, a masculine coach, or to actually bond with other boys so they develop an understanding. So you start from a place of, you might say, no zero base. You set a goal to go from white belt to yellow belt, and you progress, and you're doing that with other boys. Now you might be thinking, what does this have to do with the beta installation? Well, it's a simple one. The beta installation is really a feminine installation. It's an installation where you've substituted, from a relational perspective, what should be at the pinnacle of your focus, which is your purpose. Then yourself, then your success, whether that be academic or professional. You substitute that with a woman at the top, where you pedestalize a woman, and as a result of that, your purpose goes out the window. Your work is something you could change. Whatever you can do is just to have her in the picture. And part of the reason for that was because you were raised by a mother who you love and who did right by you. And sometimes without a father who you never loved or never knew, or with a father who was too feminine and therefore didn't provide the right role model, or you might say the avatar for you to emulate. Now, these are 4 items I want to cover in today's session. We've got to number 12. There are 15 or 16. Into tomorrow's session, I will cover the last 4, and then I'll bring it together, because I think the most important part of everything I'm sharing is to get you to the end, which is to talk about how to fix it and why you should consider fixing it. Apologies for the noise. I guess someone is hungry. I want to wish you all the best.